thank you all for coming out this evening. I hope you are here for the Open Space and Recreation Plan meeting. That's what we will be talking about. My name is Jason DeRozier. I am the Senior Planner for Housing and Public Engagement at the Old Colony Planning Council. Beyond that, I'm a resident of Whitman. I live in town. My wife and I bought our house in Whitman in 2019, and my daughter goes to Whitman Hanson High School. So it's been nice to sort of work on a project that's sort of in my own backyard and sort of get me more aware and accustomed to the various open spaces, green spaces, recreational facilities in Whitman. So this is the agenda for this evening. We'll do a brief review of survey findings. How many of you here took the public survey for the open space plan? Just get a sense. Two, maybe? This was last fall. So we'll do a review of findings, get your thoughts on that. We review and discuss the Open Space and Recreation Plan 10-year action plan, which is essentially the recommendations that we as the consultant, the planning agency, are recommending that the town do over the next 10 years to preserve, conserve current open spaces, acquire more, as well as recreational facilities. There'll be and then after that, a small, short mapping activity for anyone that wants to participate in that, and then some Q&A if anyone has any questions. However, if you have any questions as we go along, don't necessarily need to wait till the end. If you raise your hand, I'll see it and I'll sort of like ask you, and we can have a discussion as part of this. What I don't want this to be is sort of like a lecture. I teach part-time at Bridgewater State University, where I did my undergrad. So that's where I do generally lecture-based conversations. Here, I want this to be more of a conversation, more of a discussion around open spaces and recreational spaces in town. So if you have questions, please feel free to review those, ask those. But first, time for an icebreaker. What is one word you would use to describe open space in Whitman?
Limited.
Limited?
Forest.
Forest. Okay. What else?
The park.
The park. So town park. Yep. Might be a word. What's another word some of you might use to describe open space in Whitman? Recreational. So there's a lot of recreational. Walking trails. Walking. Great. Who said limited? So there's this idea, and this came through from the survey, that Whitman has limited open space. Myself and members of the Open Space and Recreation Plan Steering Committee walked a number of the open space, and you'll see some photos, and we'll have some discussion. But in some of these spaces, you forget that you're in Whitman. However, is it marketed, is it communicated that these spaces are open, that they're even there? And so part of the Open Space Recreation Plan is to sort of highlight and lift up the spaces that we have in town for public use. So just by way of introduction to Old Colony Planning Council, OCPC was established in 1967 as part of Act 40B, regional planning agency with a focus on comprehensive development. And so we have a comprehensive planning department that focuses on the comprehensive needs of the community, whether it's sort of infrastructure, housing, economic development, transportation, sustainability, resiliency, water, et cetera, et cetera. The objective of OCPC is to improve the physical, social, and economic conditions of the OCPC region. That region comprises 17 member municipalities. You'll see OCPC sort of municipalities in orange. This makes up our sort of region. So when we talk about regional planning, we're looking at sort of the South Shore, mostly from Plymouth to Hanover to the north, over to Stoughton, Avon, and Brockton and Easton, down through the Bridgewaters, Halifax and Plimpton, and sort of the communities in the middle. The communities that are in green are our area agency on aging service area. For those communities, we help support residents and providers of assisted senior care to make sure that residents are well taken care of and sort of able to thrive in their sort of senior assisted living facilities, communities. And then OCPC engages in various planning disciplines, many of which were previously named. We do water planning, sustainability planning, hazard mitigation planning. As the housing planner, I do a lot of the housing work, open space planning, age and dementia friendly planning, transportation, so on and so forth. The open space, yep.
Do you also do the senior housing?
Sorry, I didn't call on you because you're sitting on the side, so I didn't see your
That's
hand.
all right, no. Do you also do the senior assisted housing and support for the towns in Orange as well?
Not so much, or the green, rather. Oh, orange?
In the Orange.
Yes, but
So you do
the
the
ones that are specific are the ones that are in green.
Okay.
The open space and recreation plan is guided by an open space and recreation plan steering committee. These are the members. Ed Winnett, sitting over there, is a Conservation Commission representative. We also have Leanne McKenzie, who's another Conservation Commission representative. Bruce Martin is the DPW rep. Brandon Griffin is from the planning board. Ryan Tully, in the back with the camera, is the representative from the recreation department. And the committee is overseen by Assistant Town Administrator Kathleen Keefe. So it's a larger team than just me working on this plan. It has involvement from sort of town representatives, volunteers from the various towns, boards and commissions, as well as a couple of colleagues at Old Colony Planning Council, including Rhiannon Dugan, who's a comprehensive planner at OCPC, and Alyssa, who's in the back, who's helped with some of the drafting of a couple of the chapters. What is an open space and recreation plan? So just a little bit of background. An open space and recreation plan is a roadmap for prioritizing open space and recreation projects and expenditures. So it provides that roadmap over a 10-year period for the town. It's also a prerequisite for the Massachusetts Division of Conservation Service grants. And so if the town of Whitman wants to apply for and receive funding through this grant, as well as a couple of other grants, you need an active and updated open space and recreation plan. Prior to this 2025 update, the last updated open space plan for the town of Whitman, I think, was from 2000. So there's a lot of work that has been done over the last 25 years. So a lot of catch-up work that is needed to be done for this. There's been a public process. There's a survey. I've done a number of public meetings, including this one this evening. I've done focus groups with high school students, with seniors at the Council on Aging, the Senior Center. I've posted up in the park and I've talked to random people playing basketball or walking their dogs in the park to get their sense of what the needs are. People walking around Hobart Pond or Harding's Pond. So there's been a lot of engagement. I tabled at Whitman Day in the park. Some of you might have sort of stopped by, participated in the activity, which is going to be included in the slideshow here. So lots of people have engaged in this process. The plan components, or what makes up the open space plan, there's a sort of starts off with a plan summary. Then there's an introduction and a discussion of community engagement processes. There's demographic data. There's an environmental inventory, an inventory of land. So this is essentially an inventory of all land that is under the control of Whitman, whether it's DPW, Conservation Commission, DPW, the town, et cetera, et cetera. An analysis of needs, a 10-year action plan, public comments, and an ADA inventory was included up until the state decided to update their workbook. So an ADA inventory is no longer required. I'm still including it because we did it. And making sure that we're stewards of town resources. The town already paid for it. So I want to make sure that it's included. So we did an ADA assessment of a couple of town-owned properties and parcels in town. So that will be included as well.
What is ADA?
Americans with Disabilities Act. So making sure that it's sort of accessible for people with disabilities, various disabilities. Thank you for that question. What is open space? So what's considered open space for the open space plan? Anything that falls under conservation land, forested land, agricultural land, athletic fields, playgrounds, small parks or pocket parks, green buffers along roadways, and or undeveloped land of conservation or recreational interest. Whitman has a number of these, and so a number of these, if not most of them, outside of, we have no formal agricultural land in town, but short of that, there's lots of land that were sort of included in the open space and recreation plan. So the process for creating the plan involves drafting specific language for goals, objectives, and actions, execution of the public participation plan. Over 500 residents participated in the open space and recreation plan through those various touch points. And we've received diverse input from youth, parents, seniors, and active users of the various spaces in town. We've collected data for the parcel inventory, the ADA inventory, the analysis of needs and demographics. And lastly, we've analyzed resource protection needs and management needs. Before I continue with this, how many of you, by show of hands, know that Whitman, in theory, I'll say, has a town forest? Has anyone walked it or gone through it? What are your thoughts of it? This is a photo of it here, sort of the entrance into the town forest.
There's just no way to get, there's no parking
Mhm.
there.
Yep.
So it's not the most convenient.
So it's hard to access. If you want to use it, you don't live near there and can't walk, it might not be at the top of your list. Any other thoughts about the town forest before we continue? Ed, you walked it. What did you think about it?
I did. I was born and raised in this town and grew up right down the street on Cherry Street. I had no idea we had a town forest. I used to go behind Clayton's when Clayton's was there, but I didn't realize part of that land out there was the town forest. And it's beautiful woods. I love the woods, outdoors a lot, and it's got a lot of potential.
Yeah, and accessing it is a little sort of, I don't want to use the term sketchy, but that might be the best word because you have to walk between two houses in order to access it, and it doesn't look like an access route. So it just looks like you're randomly walking between people's houses in order to access this. And so there are some recommendations that concern or in response to the town forest that I'd be interested in hearing your sort of comments around. So now we're going to review the survey responses. This photo here, it was taken off of the Donald Flaherty Trail. How many of you have heard of and or accessed the Donald Flaherty Trail? So if I asked you to meet me at the Donald Flaherty Trail, how many of you are meeting me there? Right? How many of you don't know? For those of you that don't have your hands up, you don't know what I'm talking about. You don't know the Donald Flaherty Trail. So this is a largely walking trail. It's not really hiking, but walking trail off of Auburn Street. So if you're driving up Auburn Street, Wendy's, McDonald's, CVS is behind you. Driving up towards Washington, right when you get to the top of the hill, if you turn around fast enough, you can see a sign that says Donald Flaherty Trail with an entrance sort of into it. It's easy to miss. I've spent my life, most of my life, I've lived in 8 of the 17 OCPC communities. I've spent a lot of time in Whitman. I've driven down Auburn Street for a better part of 20 years, and I've never knew it was there until I started working on this plan. This is sort of an open marshland. There's a bench right across from this. So for folks that feel like, and I've heard this as part of the survey, that Whitman is lacking open space, that might be essentially true in theory and somewhat in practice, but we have a lot of resources that people just don't know exist, right? So it's about how do we share the wealth of open space and recreational facilities that Whitman does have, and how do we sort of work on acquiring more for conservation and protection over the long term so that we can continue to enjoy spaces like this in town.
Do these trails show up on all trails? Yeah.
I'm not sure if they've been mapped on all trails yet. My colleague, Matt Dyer, who's in the transportation department, is working on updating some stuff when it comes to all trails. So we've been in active communication. The Flaherty Trail is less than a mile. It's 0.7 and it's an in and out trail. And so whether or not that meets the threshold of a walking, you know what I mean? For all trails, however, when we get into the recommendations, there might be a potential to extend the Flaherty Trail into a bigger network of trails, because Whitman lacks sort of opportunity to create new open space just because of sort of development patterns, land use patterns. Most of the downtown area has been developed already. However, there's opportunity to sort of extend trails and connect trails into other parts of Whitman, as well as to other communities that surround Whitman.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
That trail, I believe, is an old railroad bed.
Yes. Yep.
And it's very effective, but is there a map showing the entire parcel?
Yes, that's going to be part of this formal plan, which I will talk about a little later. So I brought my little pointer so you can follow along. This is essentially a highlight or an overview of the survey. We had 275 responses to the survey. 91% of survey respondents indicated that they use open spaces at least once per month. So of those that responded, are using open spaces pretty regularly, at least once a month. A segment of that, close to half, are using it more closely to once a week. Some common barriers to accessing open spaces in town include poor sidewalk conditions and lighting, lack of signage and maps. People just don't know these spaces exist or are there. Limited awareness of existing spaces, minimal bike infrastructure, and inadequate amenities, whether it's parking, seating in these spaces, access to water or restrooms. From the survey, these community wants more of. These were the things that we heard more so than anything else. The top two priorities for community members were a skate park and a fenced-in dog park, like a dedicated dog park, so that people could bring their dogs to a dedicated dog park and not necessarily have to bring them to the town park. Some like using the town park, but others wanted a dedicated space where they could let their dogs run off leash, play with other dogs, have toys and dog amenities that aren't available at the town park. Skate park as well. Community gardens, walking trails and natural paths, farmers markets and events, clean restrooms, shaded seating and gathering spots, and bike paths and bike racks were sort of the top priorities that were identified as the priorities that should be included in the open space plan. The most popular outdoor activities, 62% walking or hiking without a dog, following closely behind, walking or hiking with a dog. I'm sure some of these people are duplicative between the two. Sometimes they take the dog for a walk, sometimes they don't. But overall, people are going for walks, and they're walking, they're hiking. That's their most popular outdoor activities. Rounding out the top four, playgrounds, and athletic sports, so the field sports. Field sports are things like football, soccer, anything you play on a field. Enough open space by age, so this might be hard to see. The dark blue is yes. This light blue color is unsure, and I believe this is somewhat lilac maybe. Purple is no. So as you can see, under age 13, 57% believe that Whitman has enough space for children under the age of 13. 31%, on the other hand, think that there's enough open space for the ages between 13 and 18, which is largely what's believed to be the largest underserved community age group in Whitman. 41% believes that the age between 19 and 59 are served by open space in town, and 38% for age 60 plus. Community priorities, and these are the big bucket areas: recreation opportunities for teens and young people, trail connectivity and signage, beautification and maintenance of spaces that currently exist, nature-based and community events, and safer walking and biking infrastructure. These things here and this down here are the things that really make up the 10-year action plan. So taking things that were received by the survey out through the various focus groups, Whitman Day in the Park, various conversations that I've had, as well as sort of priorities that were identified excuse me, by the Open Space and Recreation Plan Steering Committee, really sort of leveraged what was going to become the action plan. And then just some initial concerns by location. So Memorial Field, which is that field over by the police station across from Colebrook Cemetery. Some of the biggest concerns there were just geese in general. Poor drainage, so it floods and it's hard for people to use for games and practice, and some outdated and or damaged bleachers. With the town forest and Hobart Pond, trails and walking paths are overgrown. They're undermarked, and there's very little visibility that these spaces exist. Sidewalks and trails generally, the trails themselves are cracked or non-existent, and there are barriers to access. And then restrooms came up pretty frequently in terms of public restrooms. So if you're in, I don't know, walking Hobart Pond or town forest, or if you happen to jaunt into Hobart Meadow, there's not a whole lot of public restrooms outside of businesses, and people don't feel welcome to use those restrooms. And so there's this idea of whether or not we can have sort of like public restrooms in and around town, that people can use. This is something that we're looking at. So just highlighting some of the specific survey responses. These are specific quotes. However, these fit into a broader narrative, or sort of highlighted a lot of themes, which are sort of highlighted in blue. Many areas do not have access for those who have difficulty walking. So if you're not able to walk or have mobility sort of issues or challenges, it's hard to utilize a lot of the open and recreation spaces that we do have in town. Not all spaces feel safe. This is one that I heard specifically about the Colebrook Loop, specifically when you get to behind is sort of like, signs that there's maybe some illicit behaviors taking place back there. And so teens specifically, who I've talked to a lot, don't feel safe sort of walking in and around that space. Any plan for open spaces needs to balance areas for use with preservation of natural resources and wildlife. So, preservation needs to be a big part of this so that wildlife is not disturbed any more than it probably already is, and that natural resources continue to flourish in those areas. Whitman has a lot of potential to develop and enhance our natural land, so that kind of goes along with that one, that, these are not at odds with each other. There's opportunities to do both. However, you need to really focus on preservation as part of that. It would help promoting the different open and green spaces in town with signs identifying the areas and maybe town maps. At intersections, giving arrow directions, letting folks know where, the town forest is at the Rotary, or the Donald Flaherty Trail at the top of Washington Street. And then take care of what we have. We need to keep the parks, playgrounds, and open spaces in good condition. So, yes, it's important to sort of acquire and develop new open spaces, providing new recreational facilities. However, we have to take care of what we do have so that that doesn't fall into disrepair, and that we're not sort of acquiring new the things and letting what we have sort of continue to sort of be in bad condition. So now the fun part, reviewing and discussing the 10-year action plan. Before the OSRP workbook was updated, action plans were for 7 years. That has been updated to 10 years. So this planning process is to set what are the goals, what is the vision for the next 10 years, so that 10 years from now, hopefully the town has done a lot of these things that were in here, and then how do we sort of build off the momentum of that. This is just an activity that I did that I referenced earlier at Whitman Day in the Park. It's sort of the wish tree. I just asked people, what do you wish we had more of what do you wish we had more of in Whitman? What are some challenges or barriers to why you don't access certain open spaces in town? And each prompt had its own color of sticky note. And I heard a lot of feedback, again, around dog parks and skate parks here. So there are 10 goals that are overarching goals that are going to be included in the open space and recreation plan. Number 1, champion the protection and restoration of Whitman's natural environment for future generations. 2, proactively preserve open space while guiding sustainable and resilient growth. Goal 3, ensure universal access to parks and open spaces by removing barriers and embracing inclusive design. That gets to sort of the barriers that exist to sort of folks that might have mobility challenges, mobility issues, making things more ADA accessible. Because if it's accessible to a mother with a stroller or for a senior with mobility issues, it's accessible for everybody. And so that's really the principles around inclusive design. Goal 4, unify and elevate land stewardship by aligning Conservation Commission priorities and creating management plans. Goal 5, empower local champions to monitor progress and drive implementation with transparency and accountability. Goal 6, inspire community pride and connection through greater visibility and enjoyment of trails, landings, and natural areas. Goal 7, transform Whitman into a walkable, bikeable town through connected greenways and safe pedestrian corridors. Goal 8, secure and steward critical open space to preserve ecological, recreational, and cultural value. Goal 9, create a centralized resource hub that equips landowners with tools to protect and care for their land. And goal 10, expand recreational offerings to meet evolving community needs. So, and we're going to go by goals one by one, and sort of just give a highlight of sort of what the overall strategies for each goal are, and then have just a brief conversation about, like, does this meet sort of like, is this going in a direction that you as residents of Whitman want to see it go? So the first goal, champion the protection and restoration of Whitman's natural environment for future generations. Some actions here are restore and enhance Hobart Pond and the surrounding ecosystems. An activity attached to that is conduct pond cleanups, install signage, and host public stewardship events around sort of like keeping your water clean. How is Hobart Pond like a natural sort of ecosystem for the plant, and what happens when sort of people throw trash in the pond, for example. Goal 2, or strategy 2, identify threats to water systems. So for that would be inventory culverts and watershed stressors. 1.3, manage and reduce invasive species in town. That would involve developing an invasive species plan and host educational workshops. So if you're going to be gardening, what kind of plants are native to the area? What should you be planting versus like what are invasive species? How do you identify them? What should you do if you see them? Sort of thing. Build environmental stewardship through civic ecology. This would involve launching a youth and community-led ecology programs, sort of like, pollinator gardens, planting and caring for a pollinator garden or a rain garden. If you have a yard that floods or an area that floods, if you plant a sort of a rain garden there, you're sort of mitigating the impact of that sort of wet area, and also planting an amenity that can help, restore that area. Promote awareness through educational programming. This could involve hosting, taking care of our natural environment event series. And lastly, developing and implementing a humane goose control strategy. I think it would be unfortunate to see a bunch of dead geese everywhere. So how do we make sure that we're maintaining the goose issue in a humane and ecological way, right? That you're not poisoning a goose that's then going to get eaten by something else that gets poisoned, right? And so how do we make sure that we're developing a control strategy that works, but also is humane? And for that, research best practices and install deterrence in parks and fields, specifically Memorial Field. For goal 1, what are your, and each of these will be tied. So I didn't include that for these slides just because they'd be too big and you wouldn't be able to read anything. So you have sort of the activities here, strategies, activities, and then there's like a responsible party. Like, who's going to be responsible for this in town? Some might be the Recreation sort of Commission, some might be Conservation Commission, some might be Cultural Council or public schools, public library, et cetera, et cetera. There's a timeline. So because this is a 10-year plan, it's either going to be ongoing, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 7 years, or 7 to 10 years. For sort of identifying the timeline. And then there will be a sort of funding. So Whitman, like many towns in the region, are going through tightening budgets and uncertainty when it comes to budget. And so we want to make sure that we're not just saying the town needs to pay for all of this stuff, right? There are grants, there are other resources available, and directing the town to apply for grants that can help advance some of these goals, some of these strategies. So
the other thing too is a lot of the folks that are supporting this in the town are volunteers, Conservation Commission.
Yep, exactly. So for goal 1, what are your thoughts about sort of what's been included? Does this all sound good to you? Anything that you feel is missing when it comes to championing the protection and restoration of Whitman's natural environment for future generations? So I'll leave this up for a second. You can kind of think about it. I'll go through the next one. And so as people sort of think about things, feel free to raise your hand and we can talk about it. So goal 2, proactively preserve open space while guiding sustainable and resilient growth. This is about sort of that balance or that tension between conservation and preservation, and sort of development, growing to meet sort of the town's ongoing long-term needs. So 2.1, modernize zoning to promote conservation as part of land use policy. This can be done by updating bylaws for what's called low impact development, or LID, or conservation subdivisions. This involves sort of prioritizing open space and the preservation of open space natural resources as part of development. So how do you do, not that any of this is coming to Whitman anytime soon, but if there is a new residential subdivision or a new residential development that comes up, how do you prioritize sort of green space, open space as part of that? Courtyards, large sort of buffered green areas, rain gardens, green roofs. In Paris, not a perfect example for Whitman. However, Paris just a couple of years ago passed a zoning bylaw that requires green roofs in every building developed or redeveloped in sort of like their downtown of Paris. And so rooftop gardens, rain swell, those sorts of things. Identify land for permanent protection, map and prioritize parcels for acquisition or easements. This is ongoing and will be part of the overall parcel inventory in the open space and recreation plan. Engage landowners on preservation options. So this would involve hosting outreach sessions and direct engagement with landowners around how can they sort of deed or pass on their land at some point to the Conservation Commission so it's permanently preserved or conserved in perpetuity. Monitor conserved lands, develop and implement monitoring protocols.
Other than somebody who really wanted to do the right thing, are there any other incentives for a landowner who might have an extra amount of land to donate that? What's their benefit?
I mean, and I'm not like a tax attorney by any sense of that. And yeah, I'm doing some research. I know that there might be some tax breaks that exist in terms of the donating the monetary value of that land. As part of this, there's going to be a lot of research that's going to continue to be done in terms of like, if there aren't any incentives beyond the touchy-feely stuff, like you'll feel great by donating, a portion of your backyard to Whitman. But how do you sort of add some additional sort of benefit to landowners for doing that beyond sort of the, what's the word I'm looking for? Aspirational feelings that some people might have. Any other questions on this one before going on to the next?
I just had a question.
Sure.
All the land that's available to be developed, say, how much does Whitman have? I mean, compared to other people just owning the land?
You mean in terms of the overall land in Whitman, how much of it could be developed?
I want to know how much is Whitman's land, not owned by an individual.
All right. So there are 2 maps in the back, which we'll get to after sort of the slides, that sort of specifically calls out town-owned land. 46% of Whitman is wetlands, forested areas, land you can't build on. So 46% of that land is off the table. Of that, of the land, Whitman does own a lot of parcels. Not all of them can be used, which is part of the parcel inventory, determining sort of are there open space or recreational opportunities in the future that might exist in these spaces. A lot of them are too small to really do anything with. So it's like, how do we make sure that these are permanently conserved as sort of like, areas for migrating birds to just land and sort of take a rest, or, deer and other sort of, wildlife sort of to eat and graze and sort of rest and those sorts of things. But we have maps in the back that sort of calls that out. Goal 3, ensuring universal access to parks and open spaces by removing barriers and embracing inclusive design. First would be to identify physical barriers. this would involve conducting a deeper ADA audit of all town-owned open spaces to get a sense on what are the barriers that exist. If I'm in a wheelchair, what can't, or if I have mobility issues with walking, if I'm sort of have hearing issues, if I'm deaf, if I'm blind, et cetera, how might I not be able to access all of these spaces? Improve accessibility, upgrade signage, paths, and parking at parks, add inclusive amenities such as benches, shade structures, and sensory features to make them more inclusive and more welcoming to folks with various disabilities. Expand inclusive programming, such as potentially launching senior and adaptive recreation programming. So some examples that I've given on this is sort of, if you have seniors or older adults, for example, who are in a wheelchair, sort of having basketball or pickleball, or other sorts of activities that folks that are in wheelchairs can still participate in. Improving and expanding sidewalk network around open spaces and recreation facilities. I have heard from a lot of folks, particularly who live more so towards the Rotary in town, off of Essex Street, or South Ave, that is hard to access sort of the town park because there's no sidewalks along a big stretch of that. And so people are not utilizing some of these spaces because they don't feel safe walking to them. So as part of this would be conducting sidewalk condition assessments, coordinating sidewalk improvements with ADA accessibility upgrades, and complete streets goals, which is essentially around street design. Engage the community to identify unsafe or missing sidewalk connections so that those connections can be made. And improving outdated and or broken playground equipment, replacing outdated equipment, and improve safety and accessibility, assess and repair deteriorated recreational infrastructure, whether that's playground equipment, bleachers, basketball hoops, so on and so forth. So from universal access and embracing inclusive design, what are your thoughts here? Is this all sort of, you think, meet the need of the town over the next 10 years? Anything missing that you think you'd like to see in terms of this goal?
Number 3.5, getting sidewalk improvement. It's not just around open spaces.
Yep.
It's throughout the entire town.
Yes. That will be sort of so I'm doing this work right now on the open space and recreation plan. I've worked with the town to submit an application for funding for a master plan, a town-wide master plan. Whitman has not had a master plan in, from what I can tell, 30 or 40 years. It's been a long time since Whitman had an active master plan, to the point where I can't find it. It's probably printed out in someone's desk in town hall somewhere, which is probably the case. The open space and recreation plan is specifically interested in sort of, in this case, sidewalk improvements, infrastructure improvements around sort of open space facilities and recreational facilities. However, this is providing the framework that can be included in a town-wide sidewalk audit, right? And so we're doing this sort of in quilt work sort of fashion, where like we're working on this, which then can be extended into a master plan. And so I know in living sort of in the area of Whitman along Route 18 down by Wendy's and Stop and Shop and all of that, there's a sidewalk on the opposite side of the street for me, but I have to cross Route 18 to get to the sidewalk, and crossing Route 18 at any time of day is not easy as a pedestrian. And so sometimes I will walk if I need to on the side of the street rather than try to cross the street to get to the sidewalk. So this is all sort of a piece of the overall puzzle that will include how do we do sidewalk and infrastructure extensions townwide. But that's a good point.
Obviously, the goal is to, do all of this for the benefit of the townspeople first and foremost.
Yep.
What sort of thought process has been in place to do this for all of us, as well as attracting people from other nearby towns to come here for whatever the goal is? Maybe to draw more people in so that there's opportunity and people have awareness, because I work in Hanover, but
Yep.
I'm in all these towns driving around talking to people, and probably like a quarter of the people I talk to don't even know where Whitman is.
That's fair.
And they live 2 towns away.
Yep. Yep.
And so like, in that scenario, is it a thought process where we're doing some of this to attract people for a greater future goal?
Yep.
Whatever that goal might be?
Yep.
Or is this more geared for us?
I think it's a little bit of both and. These first couple of goals really talked about how to improve these spaces for current or future Whitman residents. Sort of thinking more insular in terms of Whitman itself. There are some goals a little bit later towards the end that really talks about more regional and how do we sort of situate Whitman as an attractive area for economic development or for green tourism or whatever that is. Whitman doesn't have sort of an island grove or a Burridge or something else that might a large tract of open space that might attract people from various from more regional standpoint. We do have sort of an Olmsted park, not designed by Frederick Law Olmsted himself, but his sons, but it does fit in sort of the framework of a Olmsted designed park. And there are some opportunities to extend walking trails through some of our current open space facilities that would make it more regional, connecting East Bridgewater via Whitman to Abington through sort of a trail network.
Like out of our, obviously, we can look at the map for, visual things, but how many of the open spaces are linkable for either walking or, gravel bike trails? Because I know people around here, there's a few spots for biking, for example.
Yeah.
But a lot of times I'll hear from friends and I'm like, maybe not the biggest bike enthusiasts,
Yep.
but they have to travel
Yep.
just to do it. And that sometimes takes the joy out of, or the spontaneity of getting on a bike and just going.
Yeah, gravel bike trails we might have to look at, but there are opportunities to do some maybe unpaved bike and walking trails through some of these areas. Myself, Ed, who's in the back, and Ryan, who's also in the back, trudged through a lot of mud and muck and forests to sort of like get a sense on what these spaces are like, to be able to see, is it even feasible to sort of connect some of these trails rather than just putting in a plan and being like, let the town figure it out. We did some sort of back end work to see what those opportunities are. My colleague, Matt, brought a drone so we could have aerial footage and sort of aerial views in terms of like, could we put boardwalks in? What would it look like to sort of, can we maneuver around this pond or this lake to sort of get to another connection point? And talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But yes, we do also have that sort of regional sort of making Whitman, I don't want to say more attractive to folks outside the region, but like how do we bring people in to sort of enjoy sort of the amenities that we have in Whitman as well. Yep.
So I'm very interested in all this stuff. That's why I'm here. And when you say 10-year plan and master plan and OCPC and regional and DPW and state, how do we, from the low-hanging fruit all the way up to these grand goals? I know you said there's like 1 to 3, 3 to 5 years, all that kind of, but does everybody, do all of those elements of those organizations know what everybody else is doing so that, for example, there's the complete streets plans right up to, I don't know, for the next 10 years when we're running from the center of town up to South Avenue and all of that, but it seems to be, as we've already established, kind of limited, and then over, say, by the Rotary, there's less of that going on. Is there a grand plan where people that are within the town and without the town working together? With things like technology, drones, historically drawn up parts of the land and everything else to try to find how we develop this?
Yep. So one of the earlier slides was sort of like who's on the steering committee. So you have Recreation Commission, you have Conservation Commission, you have the Assistant Town Administrator, you have the Planning Board. So DPW. So we're already in conversation with all of these departments to sort of say like, does this work for your current capacity, what you sort of like view your work to be over the next 10 years? Because I don't want to create a plan that just sits on a shelf somewhere, right? Beyond that, one of the strategies you'll see in a couple of slides from here is around sort of an implementation committee. So having residents from Whitman, towns, boards, volunteers be part of a committee to drive this work forward. And so really, and then sort of like connecting with the funding sources, as well as the responsible parties, making sure that there are people responsible for this work during that time period, and that there's money available and identified to do it. Because it's one thing to say, it's great if you, conduct ADA audits of all town open spaces, but if you don't have money to pay for it, it's not really worth anything. And so making sure that there are resources available to do this, and there are, and that's an actionable item that Whitman can do day one after this is approved by the state, at the state level. And then in terms of longer term things, I think the one value of also having this process starting at a time where there could be a master plan, which is essentially a 10, 15, 20-year document, is that this sort of sets the stage for additional conversations for like the longer term. So something might be identified as like year 7 or 10, but it's like after year 2, you're just like, oh no, that should be part of the master plan process, right? And so you can have those conversations, really make sure that things are connected to one another, and that things are coordinated in a way and connected in a way that makes sense. Goal 4, unify and elevate land stewardship by aligning Conservation Commission priorities and creating management plans. Create tailored management plans. This would involve developing site-specific stewardship strategies for all conservation-owned parcels and lands. Foster volunteer networks. Establish friends of groups for parks and open spaces, so that there's a group of dedicated volunteers sort of stewarding and maintaining these spaces. Launch volunteer cleanup crews. Coordinate reoccurring stewardship events. Cleaning the park, or cleaning Hobart or Harding's Pond. A cleanup of Flaherty Trail or the town forest. Establish local control of the Whitman Town Forest. And so these next 3 are all connected to the town forest. I've done a lot of research on the town forest. It seems that the town forest was taken by the town of Whitman due to tax takings. Some guy owned this parcel a long time ago, the woods a long time ago, 1920s, 1930s, owed taxes. So the town sort of took control of this through tax takings. There's been nothing done with it since the 1930s. 1936 is the last record that I can find in a book at the commission, the deeds office. So first, you have to establish local control of the Whitman Town Forest. This involves researching current ownership and legal status, determining a pathway for town ownership or long-term control of the area. Second, develop a management stewardship plan for the Whitman Town Forest. Engage community stakeholders and experts to create a plan for passive recreation, such as bird watching or walking, ecological management and public access to the forest, and then open the town forest for passive public uses, so having residents sort of feel free to access the town forest, improve access points, signage, and trails to allow for public enjoyment. The one piece of this that the town will have to figure out is it formally identified as a town forest, or is it something like Whitman Woods? Because if you have something designated as a town forest, you need a official town forest sort of management plan. There's a lot of requirements that go into having a town forest, like Plymouth has to do with Miles Standish State Forest, for example. Lots of requirements. If you just call it like Whitman Woods or something not town forest, there's a little less sort of structure and requirements that the town would be required to do. So if you just want to preserve it and conserve it as sort of like forested lands, you don't necessarily have to call it a town forest unless you want to have it formally be a town forest. So that's sort of in the longer term sort of discussion part of it. And then improving maintenance of neglected and overgrown public lands. This would involve conducting an inventory of neglected parcels and prioritize cleanup. This would include the parts of the Flaherty Trail, the town forest, Hobart Meadow, Bear Meadow, some of the areas that we're looking to potentially do some extensions or reconfiguring of walking trails to make a more connected area.
Is there a current concern about the actual proper ownership of the town forest?
No,
Is that why it's up here?
no. So the town, from what I can tell, as of 1936, the town owned, but a lot of things could probably happen. I don't know of anyone who works for the town of Whitman who was around in 1936. And so there's not a lot of institutional knowledge beyond sort of what's existing in the deeds books. So that town council largely in the select board will just have to research to make sure that it is actually under town control. And then what does that look like for long-term control? And there's a short process that the town has to do in order to do that. Goal 5, empowering local champions to monitor progress and drive implementation with transparency and accountability. This is the Plan Implementation Oversight Committee that I talked about. So it's one thing to have a plan, and it's another thing to have the plan implemented and things actually being done with it. And so part of this would be to form an open space and recreation plan implementation subcommittee, which would be a group of town sort of people who work for the town as well as volunteers who sort of take this action plan and sort of put it into action. Say, we're applying for these grants, we're going to research where, I don't know, do the culvert assessments or contract with a company or a business that does them, so on and so forth. So making sure that things are actually identified in the open space plan actually take place so that in 10 years from now, if I'm still at Old Colony Planning Council and I work on the next one, because I can tell you in reading the one from 2000, there was no record of any of that stuff really sort of being done or what had happened to a lot of them. And so making sure that there's a group of people who are responsible for, beyond the departments, but people sort of in charge with driving the plan forward. Monitor and track progress of the plan. This would involve creating and updating stakeholder action checklists annually because things change. So the plan, the checklist or the action plan should change with it. Engaging the public annually. So host annual open forums for feedback on a yearly basis to say, this is what we've done this year, this is what we're looking at doing next year, so the town members are sort of in the loop what's being done as far as the open space recreation plan recommendations. And then sharing progress. This would involve publishing a public progress reports every 3 years. So at the end of year 1 and 3, a progress report comes out 3 to 7, another progress report, and then 7 to 10, the last progress report. And then you go through another process to update this open space plan, and then more progress reports if that ends up being a recommendation. And there would also be a presentation to the select board as part of that. So this is really about sort of transparency and accountability with the open space plan. Goal 6, inspiring community pride and connection through greater visibility and enjoyment of trails, landings, and natural areas. This is one of the bigger goals. 6.1, increase wayfinding and interpretation. So this would involve installing kiosks and signs along trails. Something a little bit more than what's currently at the Flaherty Trail, maybe, in terms of like, this is, here's the trail, so that people can see it. Or, a sign or a kiosk showing the trails through the town forest and connecting areas. When we get down here, in terms of extending trails beyond sort of Whitman into Abington and East Bridgewater, you could have signs sort of showing, you start here, but you might come out in East Bridgewater, or by going through this trail, you can get from East Bridgewater through Whitman to Abington. Expanding trail access and outreach. This would involve producing trail maps, both print and online, which gets to the Mass Trails piece that was talked about, making sure that people know that these trails exist. Host recreation and engagement events. Coordinate Explore Whitman's Outdoors Week or nature events to get more people outdoors enjoying some of these facilities. 6.4, promoting community cleanup and beautification. This would involve launching a town cleanup day and pollinator garden programs. That's similar to a goal earlier in the slideshow. 6.5, expand public events and social gatherings. This is something that was identified as part of the survey, as well as some conversations I had in the town park around hosting seasonal events like farmers markets, movie nights, and concerts. The town of Whitman already has the concerts during the summer. But how might we sort of also have things like farmers markets or movie nights, which might be an opportunity to bring people in from the surrounding communities into Whitman to enjoy I don't know, Whitman's Farmers Market, and this is also connected to something. This next one, evaluate options for seasonal or event-based car-free zones to enhance pedestrian access and community use. Identify locations for car-free zones near parks, the downtown, or event spaces. Conduct traffic and pedestrian studies to assess feasibility and impacts on local businesses as well as pedestrians and vehicular users. Engage stakeholders, including residents, businesses, and public safety officials through surveys or forums. Pilot a car-free zone during a seasonal event or a weekend to test community response. So this came through a couple of conversations that I had around if there were, let's say, a farmer's market in a town park, or, what might it look like to close Washington Street, let's say from Napoli Pizza down to Restoration Coffee, 2 cars, right? And you set up sort of like ulterior roads that cars can use during a couple of hour period, but essentially you have businesses who exist along Washington Street, so to bring their businesses outside. You might have sort of like cafe-style eateries outside, and sort of make the street more sort of lively and then more focused on pedestrian sort of community and social use, right? So what would that look like? That might open up additional possibilities for people, which could also be something that attracts people from sort of like the surrounding communities into Whitman, who then sort of like shop and visit local businesses and spend money in Whitman that they might not spend otherwise.
Quick question, Jason. Jason, expand trail access and outreach.
Yep.
Are there any trail maps available now?
Uh,
Are they available online?
Short answer, no. Long answer, kind of.
Well,
So,
I know that the one for whatchamacallit is available because I found that. But I don't know where the other trails are.
Yep. After the slide, I'll pull up a website. There's a blogger that has walked a lot of the trails and areas in Whitman and has written about them, which is essentially, when I was doing my research, how I found Whitman has a town forest, because they had walked it and sort of like said, this is the condition it was in, which is how I knew sort of like the walk between the 2 houses to get to it, because I wouldn't have known where it was if I didn't read about it. So that website exists.
That I want to do because I am retired. I want to walk all the trails. So if you could, I'd appreciate it.
No, and I'll pull that up. And I emailed you, so I can also share it via email. Yep. I apologize for the small writing on this one. There's a lot here, as you can see. And I like to try to keep just 4 because memories are a thing. Making sure that everything's on one slide as much as possible. Goal 7, transform Whitman into a walkable, bikeable town through connected greenways and safe pedestrian corridors. 7.1, improve pedestrian infrastructure. This would include repairing sidewalks and installing lighting on key corridors. 7.2, support active transportation. Active transportation is just for anyone who's not in a car. Walking, biking, riding scooters, mobility devices, et cetera, et cetera. This would involve installing bike racks at parks and public buildings. Plan regional trail connections. Evaluate the feasibility of trail links to East Bridgewater, Rockland, and Abington. So we walked a lot of these, and there is opportunity to extend, in essence, right? I say feasible because from walking it, it's easy to make the connections of where it should be. Now, we don't know how much it would cost. We don't know what sort of infrastructure is needed in order to make these connections happen. And so there's some additional feasibility analysis and evaluations that need to be done to figure out exactly where do these sort of connections happen. Are folks familiar with Bear Meadow? Have you heard of Bear Meadow before? It's sort of like on the East Bridgewater side of Whitman. We walked through that. Are folks familiar with Hobart Meadow? It's where sort of the compost pile is. There's a community garden over there. In the back, there's also a meadow area. So essentially, you could connect East Bridgewater, let's say we're down here, East Bridgewater through Whitman, through Bear Meadow. Bear Meadow would come out sort of over by Commercial Street. And then you sort of figure out how you do sort of an on-street connection pathway to Hobart Meadow, sort of through the town park area. And then Hobart Meadow could connect up to Abington via Summer Street, over by where the senior center is. So again, it works on paper and sort of like intuitively, but whether or not it's actually feasible from a monetary standpoint is another thing. So we're looking at how that might be possible. Integrate greenways into town plans. This is largely part of planning processes. So embed trails into transportation and open space connectivity. So for those of us that work on planning and regional planning, making sure that we're integrating sort of trails into the transportation planning that we do, open space connectivity that we're doing, because there's an opportunity potentially, if these connections are possible, of connecting Whitman to the Bay Circuit Trail, the Bay Circuit Network, which is a larger sort of walking trail network through southeastern Massachusetts. Expand pedestrian infrastructure. This is similar to Objective 3.5, but build sidewalks to connect neighborhoods with parks and schools so that people have safe routes to the parks, as well as children having safe routes to walk or bike to school. Evaluate options for seasonal or event-based car-free zones to enhance pedestrian access and community use. We just talked about that one. When there are similar or duplicative goals, we're sort of connecting them with other goals to make sure, because there are some activities that are connected to one singular goal or an isolated goal, but there's others that are connected across the plan. So making sure that folks recognize when things are sort of identified across multiple areas in the plan. Study and test car-free corridors in the civic and park spaces. Enhance recreational connectivity and accessibility. This would involve expanding trail networks by extending the loop via Colebrook Boulevard, also known as Little Comfort Park, and exploring the feasibility of extending the Donald Flaherty Trail. If anyone's walked the Donald Flaherty Trail, it's 0.7 miles in, and then you turn around, and then you walk out. So that is attractive to some people. It's not attractive to others. And so how do we explore the opportunity or the potential of extending the Donald Flaherty Trail further so that you can sort of, not have to turn around after 0.7 miles and then walk out the same way. Ensure sustainable and inclusive trail development by aligning design standards. This is all planner speak. Fostering active community involvement throughout the planning and implementation process. This would involve coordinating trail design, land access, and community engagement. And then lastly, strengthen regional trail connectivity and resource sharing by establishing collaborative partnerships with neighboring municipalities and relevant agencies to support coordinated trail planning, funding, and maintenance. That's related to sort of this, evaluation of extending trail links into East Bridgewater, Rockland, and Abington. And then that would involve seeking and continuing partnerships with adjacent towns and agencies. Any thoughts, questions, concerns on this one? Okay. Goal 8, we only have 2 more. Securing and stewarding critical open spaces to preserve ecological, recreational, and cultural value. This would involve prioritizing land protection, so identifying and mapping priority conservation parcels in town. What are the most important or priority parcels in towns for conservation? Acquire open space using Community Preservation Act funds and other grants to protect high-value land for in perpetuity. Partner with landowners, promote conservation easements and donations, which was similar to one that was talked about previously. Transfer Whitman Town Forest to town stewardship, again, sort of 4.4. Work with ownership entities to formally transfer land if necessary, and then permanently protect the Whitman Town Forest as conservation land. So that would involve placing a conservation restriction on the land after transfer, so it's permanently part of sort of, it's permanently protected under the conservation restriction in Whitman.
That last one says after transfer from what to what?
Yep, so there should be additional here, so there should be brackets. I copied it and then PowerPoint didn't have it. So it would be place a conservation restriction on the land and then bracket after transfer if needed, because if Whitman doesn't technically own it, because it's one thing to sort of take something in tax holding without going through the process of actually owning it. It could be held by the town of Whitman and not owned by the town of Whitman. So it's after transfer of ownership if necessary. It should say if necessary there, but it doesn't say that.
With regards to 8.2, is the Alice Carlton Girl Scout land considered part of that acquire open space?
Not as far as I'm concerned, and Ed, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or Ryan, who are also connected with this. I think that's more so of this one here, in terms of strengthening regional trail connectivity. From what I understand, the town is entertaining selling off the Whitman portion of Camp Alice Carlton to Rockland, because most of Camp Alice Carlton is actually in Rockland, not in Whitman. But part of that would have sort of an easement or an understanding that Whitman residents are allowed to use it, so that it would be protected under sort of access, but would be part of Rockland's sort of land ownership.
Yeah, and it was with also the understanding that it would remain green space, so open space. So there's a right of way to Camp Alice Carlton, but yeah, most of the actual land is owned by Rockland.
If that hypothetical scenario were unfold, would the funds from the sale be earmarked for this?
Yeah, I mean, it could go to fund other things that are identified in here or something else. That'd be part of a broader conversation around stewarding public in terms of like what is the best use of those funds. But yeah, it could be used to sort of support some of the recommendations in the open space and recreation plan. Goal 9, creating a centralized resource hub that equips landowners with tools to protect and care for their land. This one's fairly simple. Build an online and digital resource. Develop landowner web hub for Chapter 61 lands, land trust, and tax info for stewarding or donating land. 9.2, promote land protection tools. This could be distributed via mailers, newsletters, and tax bills. And lastly, host outreach events so that you would hold landowner info sessions so they understand sort of protecting, caring for their land and donating it at a later time if that's something that they're interested in doing. And then lastly, goal 10, expand recreational offerings to meet evolving community needs. This is sort of the wish list goal, I suppose. 10.1, evaluate the feasibility and potential sites for a community skate park to meet youth recreational needs. That would involve conducting a feasibility and site analysis. Many years ago, there was a site identified for a skate park in town. It was going to be where Memorial Field is now, over by the police station. I think there might have been some challenges in securing the funding in order to make the skate park happen. So the town of Whitman did have concrete skate ramps that were donated by another town that they ended up not being able to use. And so those ramps ultimately had to be destroyed via jackhammer, which is largely unfortunate as someone who skated as a young child. But there seems to be sort of a resurgence in sort of a priority or a desire to have a skate park in Whitman. 10.2, evaluate the feasibility and potential sites for a community dog park. Similarly to the skate park, would involve identifying a location and funding and ensuring accessibility and shade. Potentially, these two would also serve as an opportunity to attract folks from a greater sort of regional area. But maybe, because there are some skate parks in and around the Whitman area. However, with the dog park, the Abington Dog Park is pretty close by, but it's rocks. And I've heard from people who use the Abington Dog Park that they don't like it because it is rocks. And so if there was a fenced-in dog park with grass, that would be more sort of attractive to a lot of dog owners so that you could go there on a hot day and not have to worry about your dog burning their paws on hot rocks or injuring themselves, et cetera, et cetera. 10.3, enhance the comfort and usability of recreational areas. Involved in here would be install seating, shade, and flexible use recreational areas. And then develop revenue generating activity. This is somewhat potentially a fun and interesting creative one. Develop revenue generating activities to support open space and recreation. So what might it look like if Whitman were to pilot programs like equipment rentals, such as paddle boats or canoes, to sort of explore and use some of these parks? The way that I sort of framed it in my own head after having a conversation with a resident was who said, could we have paddle boats in Hobart Pond? Similar to like the swan boats in Boston, like goose boats. Maybe not a perfect example. In Hobart Pond, where people like rent a paddle boat and sort of like go out in the pond, or a canoe to like explore the the wetlands along Bear Meadow or Hobart Meadow, so on and so forth. Community classes and concession stands for park events or town town park events, and then exploring partnerships for event rentals and fee-based programming. So this one is largely sort of like, how can Whitman utilize its current open and recreational spaces to generate revenue, which can help support town resources overall, whether it's related to open spaces or not. So that's the 10-year action plan. This is my email if anyone has any questions. I can also share this slideshow with folks. It's my JDESROSIER@ocpcrpa.org. It's also on the website. I've also set up an email address here for anyone who has taken photos of open spaces, recreational facilities in town, and wants them for inclusion into the open space plan. I've taken some photos, but I also want to make sure that it's community generated. So a lot of the photos that are used for the slideshow and will be part of the plan have been taken by other people in town, and there's always going to be a photo credit if a photo is taken by someone else other than me. But always looking for photos. So if you were in the town forest and got a really great picture of a deer, for example, or you're along the Donald Ferry Trail, sit on that bench and see a bird, a crane, for example, which I saw but I wasn't fast enough to get a photo of it. You can send those photos to the